So here we have our Romeo guy with morphs all listed here. So we've got our various shapes for the different bits of the face that we've prepped in Modeler, so everything's nice and ready to start mapping to some controllers. So first thing I want to do is actually create some controllers, which is what I'm going to do right now. So I'm just going to switch to my view 1 here, add a null. I'm just going to call this frame Romeo. I'm going to add another null. I'm going to call this one control Romeo. In my scene editor, I'm just going to make the controller child of the frame. Grab the frame, I'm going to bring it up here somewhere. There we go. Okay. A couple of item shapes will be in order. So there we are, item shapes added. You'll notice that they are enormous. The reason I do it like this, you can make them, of course, you know, a certain size. I've made my item shape for this outer box, the frame here, 2 meters in size. The reason I do that is because I'll just take the entire thing and I'll scale it down to create my controller box, my controller portion. The reason I do it this way is because, of course, parent space inherits, so when this moves out to the edge of the box, it's moving, you know, 1 meter, which gives me a nice round, easy figure to work with when I'm in the expressions. Otherwise I'd have to be doing however many millimeters it is. But you can do it either way, it makes no difference, you've just got to get the number right. So, here's our basic little joystick controller style thing, that obviously at the moment does nothing, so we're going to start mapping it in and doing some stuff with it. So, we'll start with the jaw, because it's probably the quickest and easiest to demonstrate and get underway straight away. So, when I move this down, I want the jaw to open. When I move it up, I want the jaw to go up, and so on and so forth. So, let's go to our jaw selection of morphs here. First thing I'm going to do is take the frame Romeo, and I'm just going to clone the hierarchy. It's like that. Make that the jaw frame Romeo, and of course the jaw control Romeo. Okay, and I can just shove my original one out the way because I'll clone that a number of times. That's why I just called it frame and control, so as I've got something that I can reclone and reclone and reclone rather than having to continually make more and more boxes. So there we are, jaw frame Romeo, jaw control Romeo. So, my jaw open morph, click the envelope, and I want an expression for it, so here we go. New expression. This one will be Romeo. I always put MM in my morph mixer expressions just because it helps me separate them out in the silly little expression list here. Romeo MM, jaw, open. And the expression for this, well, it's going on the Y, isn't it? And it's going down, so it's going to be -1. And so when the Y goes to -1, I want this to go up to 100%. It's jaw control Romeo dot position dot Y. Of course, when I want to invert it, I'm just inverting between, you know, 0 and 1. As I showed you before, you can just do 1 minus, but that's no good here because, of course, we're going into the negative range. We're going into a negative number. So what we actually want is times -1. One thing that I might have forgotten to mention earlier when I was talking about the expression editor is the way that you use the minus symbol in it. If you have, let me just put in some junk here quickly, if you have -2 immediately, the expression engine sees that as a negative number, okay? If you have minus space 2, then that sees that as subtract 2. So do just watch how you use your minus symbols in the expression editor. Sometimes you'll want to subtract a number from something in an expression and you'll put minus whatever and the expression won't work. That's because what you've done is you've added in a negative number rather than subtracting a number. But in this case we are multiplying by -1, and there we go. As our thing comes down, it too comes down. We're happy with that. Unfortunately, the problem with this is that it's unclamped, so as we go up, our morph goes into negative territory, so we wind up with our morph going to -100%, which we don't want. So of course we just need to clamp this morph. So of course blank, bracket, bracket, then our expression, bracket around that, comma 0, comma 1. And so now this will go from 0 to 1, but it won't go below 0. And it won't go above 1 either, if we keep dragging. So there we are. So that's nice and easy. We can do the same for the draw close. We can just clone this expression directly. Rename it, obviously. Get rid of the times minus 1 and apply it. And there's our closing behaviour. Draw open, draw clenched, draw open, draw clenched. And that's really all there is to it. I'm going to do the same for the X channel here. So of course I want the jaw to go left when I push the controller that away, because of course this is his left side. Have I got this the right way round? Yes I have, that's good. And of course the same for the right. For the right I just clone the left. And of course I insert the minus 1 again. Yep, there we go. And so of course we can now swing our jaw around like that. There we go. And it really is as easy as that. That's all there is to it. That's basically it. I have just shown you right there how to build the entire facial rig in this manner. It really is that simple. There is nothing more to it. One thing you'll notice is that I've got these left and right jaw morphs that just push the jaw left and right laterally. Now on a human character or whatnot, if you try and push your own jaw side to side, you'll see that that is indeed pretty much how it moves. It moves laterally side to side. But often in animation we don't go for that. We go for tipping the jaw so it, you know, like this, tips off at an angle. You see. Now the real human jaw doesn't do that, but it's quite common in cartoony jaws to do it. So what I'm going to do on this little fella, instead of having the lateral left and right linked to the X channel, is I'm actually going to change that behaviour. I'm going to link the tipping left and right to that, because that's my preferred choice for cartoon characters. So there we go, with that changed over, I've now got my tipping action on the left and right. And so that gives us a motion that does this sort of thing, which is much more in keeping with a cartoon jaw, for my opinion. As for how I'm going to get the lateral left and right motion instead, well, quite simply, I'm just going to link that in to a different channel. In this case, I'm going to use rotation channel, and I'm going to choose to use the bank, because if we just look at the way that our controller's lying, that's the one that's looking forward, so may as well be the bank. When you're doing this, it's not like when we were doing bones. The rotation order doesn't really matter, because you're just looking up the channels and applying values across to something else. So rotation order, which way you're turned in heading, pitch, bank, it makes a little difference at this point for this kind of setup. That really only has an effect on bones, where you have a hierarchical structure that needs to follow through. Here we can ignore it. So I just figure out how much I want to turn it, because I don't want to have to turn it loads and loads and loads to get it to go. I normally think something like about, 30 or 40 degrees is fine. And just so as I know that I've got that, I can turn on my limits here as well. So I can turn on minus 30 and 30 for that, which will give me a nice little display on my controller here, so as I know where I'm turning it to. So I'm renaming those first pair of expressions for the left and right to tip left and tip right, just so as I don't get confused. Now I'm going to clone off and make actual, lateral left and right expressions. Of course, though, I'm using rotational channel, so my little times 1 minus 1 isn't actually going to work, because of course that would be looking at 1 degree, so that's not what I'm after here. So what am I going to use instead? I'm going to turn to map range. First thing I'm going to do is add in the rotation.bank reference there, and then map range it, comma 0, comma minus 30, comma 0, comma 1. Bracket that. There we go. Apply it. And there we go. So my turning now, when I'm at 30 degrees, that comes up to 100%. I noticed that I called that right. It should have been left. Stupid me. So I just changed that there. You do want to make sure that you get your names right, because you will generate a good few expressions to set this all up. And when you're sorting through the expression list here, if you don't have the right names, it's a real pain to find stuff later. So I reclone that now for the right hand side, and of course I just switch over my value from -30 to 30. I am of course leaving the clamping behaviour, because as we remember, map range was still, you know, continuous. It did have to be clamped. So jump into right and just apply that. So there we go. I can move my jaw and open it like that, and I can still push it side to side a little bit as well. So there we go. Lovely little jaw control there. Now for a lot of controllers in the face, we will just use a 2D structure like this, but for some areas I do use a 3D box, and I will do that on the jaw, because of course your jaw can push forward and tuck back as well, and so I'll link that to the Z channel. The only thing of course is that stupidly I've gone and forgotten to create morphs for jaw forwards and jaw backwards, so I'm just going to jump over to Modeler and do that. There we go, the magic of editing. Nice little adjustment there. So link these in. That's going positive Z will be the jaw back. So apply that there. There we go. And of course invert that for the jaw forwards. Time space -1 to invert it. Apply it. And there we have it. And so remember what I was saying about the good old jawbone and getting a arced motion in the jaw? Well, you see, our controller setup allows us to do that, so we don't need a jawbone to prevent us getting a perfect linearly opening jaw, because of course we've got the front to back motion, so we can move our controller in an arc like this and get an arc on our jaw. And I think you'll agree, if you look at that, despite the fact that he is a cartoony fella, the motion of that is pretty natural, which is of course what we've tried to do as much as possible throughout our rigging, is get natural motion into our controllers, because of course it saves us when we're animating from having to fudge things too much to try and create natural motion. The more that we've got there in our rig, then the better it is. Good stuff, huh? One thing you may have noticed here, that is for every morph I've got an ST lips version, sticky lips. These morphs enable us to, you know, open his jaw whilst keeping his lips together, because of course, you know, for actions such as chewing or mumbling or goodness knows what, you know, that's a nice setup to have. But you got to wonder, how do you do it with morphs? The simple way to do it, of course, is just to create an alternate set of morphs that have that built in. So of course you've got the jaw open, and you've got the jaw open but without the lips coming apart. You can rig this up in two ways. You can either create just a separate controller bank, a little separate controller piece like this that manages the sticky lips, and so you'd have then two jaw controllers, one for, you know, lips coming apart and the other for lips staying together. But that's a little untidy. I prefer to have it operating all off the one controller with a switch that you can throw. Just show you quickly here in Modeler, you can see that really the sticky lips, how you create the morphs is, you see the lips themselves don't actually change shape really at all. I've got a bit of narrowing going on the jaw open, but otherwise that's it. You see, I keep the lips as they are. So basically all I do is I take my original morph for the open, and then I clone it. Then of course I select the loop that is around the lips here, do underscore to remove the morph from that, and then I just reposition them. So that means that the lips are maintaining their shape, whether the jaw's open, left, right, etc. So that's basically how you create the morphs. As for creating the switch, that's pretty easy. You just need another controller chunk. I'm going to call this one the stick lips frame and control Romeo. So I'll just pull this over here, and I just want this to be a simple little switch. So I'm just going to rescale it here. And of course it only needs to be one dimensional, so I can scale it on its Z as well. I take the little controller and scale you up so I can actually see you. There we go. Probably going to help if I start colouring and filling these things in. And of course adding labels to them, because the item shape allows for that. I know the labels get a bit obscured by the controllers, but that's okay. Right, so how do we throw this into being an actual switch? Well, the first thing I want to do is I'm going to want to turn off the channels for that I'm not using. Push that over to here. What I should also do with these controllers, because you'll notice at the moment they can come, you know, well out of their bounds, is just like I did with the limits on the turn of the jaw there, is I can set position limits that will stop my controllers actually exceeding their boxes. So that's helpful. There we go. So now my controllers will only go within that certain range. In case you're thinking, hey, if I can put the controllers within a range like that, surely I didn't need to use clamp on my expressions. You did, because of course you didn't want them going negative when you went the other way. So to turn this into an operational switch, here is what we want to do. We want to tell the expressions that when this switch is in one position, this jaw is operating one set of morphs, the non-sticky lips set, and when it's in another position we want it to be operating the sticky lips set. So I don't just want this in the middle, I want it to slide from, say here, -1, let's say that will be no sticky lips, to +1, which will be sticky lips. Simplest way to do this is just with a little bit of map range and sub-expression lookup. So what I'm going to do is jump into my graph editor and pull up the expressions that we've created here so far for his jaw. So I've renamed these all A, and then I'll create another lot that I use for the sticky lips version. If our controller here was just going to go between 0 and 1, then we could just reference it directly. But for tidiness in my viewport, I want it to do the full range here rather than having nothing going on in this area. So I'm just going to create an expression that references this and delivers out a value of 0 to 1. So I may as well just clone this. I'm going to call this the Romeo stick lips switch, because this expression won't be applied to anything. It will just be a switch expression that gets referenced in other expressions. The item it's looking at is of course the stick lips control Romeo.position X, and in order to make it turn -1 to 1 into 0 to 1, I'm just going to use good old reliable map range here, comma -1, comma 1, comma 0, comma 1, bracket. Okay, this won't be applied to anything, it's just a switch expression. Fix my names here because I seem to have misspelt Romeo, which was dumb. Okay, and so we just want to add on to these expressions. So how we want it to work, we're going to have this expression here, the stick lips switch, that will deliver a value between 0 and 1 as this controller moves between -1 and 1. And so when that expression is delivering 0, we want this A morph here, which is the unstuck lips, to be active. And so all we simply do is we wrap this expression in a pair of brackets, and we multiply it by the value of 1 minus the other expression, the switch expression, which was called Romeo stick lips switch. And there we go. We add this little suffixation onto all of our other A version expressions. I'm just going to be calling these A and B. You could of course just as easily have called them, sticky lips or unstuck lips to help you remember which is which. It's just a name after all. And so presently, what we should find, even though we've added all of that on, is that our jaw is currently functioning no different than it normally would do. However, once this slides over here, that jaw control has now become inactive, because of course that little suffixation of the 1 minus the expression has made that value go to 0. So now I'm just going to clone all of these to make B versions, or stuck lips versions. And in the B version, I just remove the 1 minus and just multiply directly by that switch morph, that switch expression, sorry. So there we have it with that whole set. All we simply do is just take our sticky lips morphs and apply those to them. So the back sticky lips gets the back B morph, closed sticky lips gets the closed B morph, forward sticky lips gets the, you get the idea, and it just keeps going and going like this. There we go, we get all of those applied, and let's check it out. So there we are presently, sticky lips is turned off, and we've got our, that's going as we'd expect it to, that's quite good. Let's turn our sticky lips on, and there we go. We can now open and close our jaw, but whilst leaving the lips unaffected, so that gives us our sticky lips effect. How about that? Are we happy? I do hope so. So that's simply it. That allows us to create a controller box like this to operate a whole set of morphs together and get this kind of control. And when we want to modify things, we can do it very easily with a switch value like this, and it works pretty much seamlessly. You'll notice that, of course, when I'm throwing the switch there, everything jumps and snaps. It snaps from, stuck lips to unstuck lips. That's just a viewport refresh thing. If I were actually animating this, then it would be nice and seamless, so don't worry about that. But otherwise, that's our controllers there for the jaw, all completely set up, all completely done. Wonderful stuff. So let's go and take a look at another area now, and we'll look at doing the eyes. Because, of course, one of the things that you may have seen me do previously was I was able to have auto eyelids, not just the simple soft eyes effect that I showed you before with the joints, but an actual auto eyelid system. So let's go and set that one up.